The Chinese Civil War and Cuban Revolution were very similar, yet they also had some differences. The role of foreign influence in causing the conflicts, the economic state of the nations, and use of guerrilla warfare were three commonalities that the two conflicts shared. However, the level of poverty in each nation at the time of their respective revolutions, the style of the revolution, and nature of foreign influence were different.
Western powers' actions in China in the 1800s helped garner nationwide support for Mao Zedong's communist agenda in the mid-1900s, leading to the revolt of the Chinese Communist Party against the existing Chinese People's Republic. By the 1800s, China's prosperous standing was supported by its advanced agricultural system and skilled craftsmen. This self-sufficiency prevented Western business interests from entering China, as Chinese citizens saw the majority of foreign goods as inferior to their own products. Despite the Chinese's complete lack of interest in trading with the West, merchants were determined to gain access and decided to obtain it by selling large quantities of opium to Chinese middlemen. By 1830, it was estimated that about 20% of the Chinese central government were regularly using the addictive drug opium, proving the success the trade was having as it was reaching the highest members of Chinese society. Understanding the horrible effects this drug was having on his population, Duogang Emperor selected Chinese scholar Lin Seishu to stop the trade of opium. Lin was successful, stopping the transfer of almost 3 million pounds of the drug from reaching Chinese citizens. However, the heavily profiting British responded to Lin's success by using its military power to re-establish the opium trade, resulting in a quick and devastating defeat for the Chinese. The British then enforced the first of many unequal treaties, the Treaty of Nanking of 1842, which initiated the opening of 4 ports in China where Western merchants could trade, ordered the Qing dynasty to pay $21 million in war reparations and for the confiscated opium that from the British, and established Hong Kong as a British colony. The Nanking Treaty also allowed for opium to penetrate even further into all facets of Chinese culture, leading to a second Opium War in 1856, where the French were now involved in the opium trade. It also completely disrespected Chinese cultural values and negatively affected the health of millions of Chinese citizens. The Nanking Treaty led to other forced agreements to provide additional nations like France, the US, Russia, and Japan access to Chinese markets, further weakening the Qing dynasty's power. After the Qing dynasty fell in 1912 due to a failure to comply with the Chinese Mandate of Heaven, which was dynastic China's guiding doctrine, Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong responded to the newly formed power vacuum to obtain control of China. The history of foreign countries greatly contributing to decreasing the standard of living in China directly resulted in Mao's garnering of support from the impoverished masses throughout the nation.
Both the Spanish and United States dominated Cuba economically, mainly through their formation of a sugar monopoly in the nation. This monopoly was granted to them through the influence the U.S. had over the Cuban dictator Batista, who in exchange for being backed by the U.S. and given power in the nation, he provided American sugar companies access to the resource in his nation so they could profit handsomely. When Cubans were tired of having their country dominated by the United States, Fidel Castro's ideologies of becoming independent and removing U.S. influence from the nation through agrarian reform and nationalization were especially attractive to many Cubans, resulting in his rise to power.
As far as differences go, both Mao and Castro implemented guerrilla warfare into their militaries because, with the influx of poor, inexperienced people, guerrilla warfare was the obvious option due to the morale's lack of experience. Guerrilla warfare, on a more ideological level, is centered around hatred towards a dominating power and revolution, so these poor, undermined, and inexperienced people use this hatred towards British or Batista or the British in China to fight guerrilla styled. Almost immediately, the question arises, is guerrilla warfare the only formula for seizing power in Latin America? Or, at any rate, will it be the predominant form? Or will it simply be one formula among many used during the struggle? And ultimately, we may ask, will Cuba's example be applicable to the present situation on the continent? In the course of polemics, those who want to undertake guerrilla warfare are criticized for forgetting mass struggle, implying that guerrilla warfare and mass struggle are opposed to each other. We reject this implication, for guerrilla warfare is a people's warfare, and an attempt to carry out this type of war without the population's support is a prelude to inevitable disaster. The guerrilla is the combat vanguard of the people, situated in a specific place in a certain region, armed and willing to carry out a series of warlike actions for the one possible strategic end, the seizure of power. The guerrilla is supported by the peasant and worker masses of the region of the whole territory in which it acts. Without these prerequisites, guerrilla warfare is not possible.
Castro seizes power in 1959 and nationalized all private property. The U.S., losing all sugar business in the country, cancels all their contacts with the Cubans. The USSR/Cuban sugar for oil trade then begins in 1959 with the Cuban economy desperate to trade its most valuable resource. This signified to the U.S. that the Cubans were joined at the hip with the Soviets and that their communist influence was intruding into the Western Hemisphere. Because the Cuban economy was a monoculture economy that relied solely on the exportation of sugar in order to make profit, of which the price was based on the world prices of sugar, Cuba was destined to be a dependency-driven nation. At the time, Cold War, the only two sides a country could side with were either the United States, a Western capitalist nation, and the USSR, a communist-run socialist nation. Therefore, the U.S. placed an embargo on travel and trade in 1960 with the Cubans because of their relationship with the communist Soviets. The sheer lack of ability to trade goods was not the main reason that Cuba hurt economically. It was more so the fact that the United States cut all funds to Cuba. Castro was greatly angered by this and drove him to seek funds and loans from socialist nations across Eastern Europe. Despite ties being cut off with the Americans, the Cubans quickly modernized in multiple facets of their culture because of their relationship with the Soviet Union. Most notably, the Cubans owned the highest literacy rate in Latin America and also held the lowest infant mortality rate as well. Additionally, women's roles in society grew exponentially in Cuba under Castro's leadership, as well as literacy among women had dropped from 21% to 4% from 1953 to 1982, while economically active population has increased from 4% to 31% for women. Despite all of these advances in society, the U.S.'s refusal to do business with Cuba did leave their economy struggling and dependent on the Soviets to function.